They don't, their energy is really poor. They're having anxiety, they're having insomnia, all of these symptoms, and maybe they're having some breast tenderness. They don't make the connection. And if you're not educated in the field, how would you make the connection that your gut changes a phenomenal amount in perimenopause and menopause? As your estrogen and progesterone levels decline, you lose that beautiful mucus lining in your intestinal tract, and your cortisol goes up, and you start to develop this leaky gut. So you get this puffiness, this bloating, maybe you get a muffin top, or your muffin top turns into a cake top, and you've done nothing different with your diet or your exercise. And in fact, most people are exercising harder. They start cutting back calories. They're trying to take control of the situation. So I love to do the GI map because it gives me a real window into what's happening.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Reshape Your Health podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Morgan Nolte. Today we have a special guest, Esther Blum. She's a registered dietitian and an integrative dietitian. I think that we're going to learn a lot from her today, specifically about gut health and hormone health. Those are going to be the topics that we dive deep into today. She loves helping women around and after menopause really optimize their hormone health, sustainably lose weight, and reduce their need for medications down the road. Esther, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Morgan.
Yeah, let's start with your story. Just tell us who you are, where you're from, how you got into this field.
So I am a mom. I have a 14-year-old son. I have a rescue dog who's like part Boston Terrier, part Beagle. I have been married. We're coming up on 18 years now, which is great. And I live in a small town about 50 miles north of New York City. I was in New York City a long time. And just absolutely love it. So how I got into it was really in my blood. My grandfather was the tonsil king of Brooklyn, Harry Blum. He was an amazing ears, nose, and throat surgeon. He trained my grandmother, who was originally a dietitian. She was at Bellevue Hospital, and she went to work for him after his first wife died, just kind of running the house. And he trained her to be the anesthesiologist. And they ended up getting married. And she put the ether mask over my face while he took out my tonsils. And not only is that crazy enough, but they had a 4-story house in Brooklyn. And on the ground floor, they had a consulting room, a treatment room, and an operating room with 12-bed pediatric recovery. And he had nurses on staff, and it was pretty incredible. My brother still has the operating room sign like above his office. So my father was a dermatologist. My mother was a nurse. So science was just all around me. I grew up watching my dad and my grandfather make house calls and be very compassionate, kind healers, their entire career.
Mm-hmm. So how did you get into the field of dietetics? You're a registered dietitian. I love having registered dietitians on the show because I'm a geriatric physical therapist, kind of obsessed with nutrition. But it's so important. You cannot deny that. So tell us about how you've, found that field and found that passion to help people heal with food.
So I really loved medicine, but I did not want to be a doctor. The hospital's a jealous mistress, and I knew the time.
It is, yeah.
Right? And I knew the time commitment involved in being a physician, and physics really wasn't my thing. So I was like, that's gonna be hard for me to get into med school. So nutrition is pre-med minus all the physics. I still took physics, but less so, and then less chemistry as well. But aside from that, it's the same curriculum wise. So I did a bachelor's. I worked at Boston City Hospital for a year. And then I went to NYU and got my master's, also in clinical nutrition, and continued to work in hospitals for another 4 or 5 years at Beth Israel in New York City, which is no longer there, which is crazy. And so in that time, I was working in the cardiology units, and I had 10 minutes to give someone a lifetime of diet instruction before they were discharged. I mean, they're like getting dressed, heading out the door. And I'm like, here's a paper on, all the foods you can eat. So, and there was no continuity of care. So I really wanted to get in at a preventative level. So I went and got certified in functional medicine and left the hospital, worked for a functional medicine doctor, and then opened up my own practice after that and started writing books. So it really, I never looked back, but I'm so grateful I have the hospital experience because just the clinical knowledge you get there is unparalleled. Great.
I'm with you though. I think when you're in traditional medicine, like Western medicine, so often they're not getting care until they're already injured or ill. And at least in my field as a geriatric PT, sometimes I feel like it's too little too late. And we can use our time and resources so much more effectively and have such a greater impact on their quality of life if we can get them earlier, around the perimenopause, especially in menopause phase. If you really take control of your health in your 40s, 50s, and 60s, you're going to have a much better retirement than if you don't. So I think that was really cool to learn more about you and learn that we are passionate about that preventative side. What I think is cool about your practice and what I wanted to talk about today were the kinds of tests that you use to assess someone's gut health and to assess someone's hormone health. I don't use these tests. And so I wanted to learn more about them from you today. And I wanted you to share your expertise with the audience about, let's start with the GI test. So how do you test GI health, both clinically, like from the test itself, and then symptoms that you would think, oh, this is probably a GI problem. So let's start there.
Well, a lot of people who come to me don't realize they're having GI problems. They come to me in perimenopause and or full-blown menopause. Either they're smack in the middle, they're at the beginning, the middle, or are way past it. I treat women up through their 70s who are still having hot flashes, by the way. So can still treat them. Yes. So most people don't realize, but they come to me with a lot of bloating. All of a sudden, they don't tolerate gluten and dairy anymore. They don't, their energy is really poor. They're having anxiety, they're having insomnia, all of these symptoms, and maybe they're having some breast tenderness. They don't make the connection. And if you're not educated in the field, how would you make the connection that your gut changes a phenomenal amount in perimenopause and menopause? As your estrogen and progesterone levels decline, you lose that beautiful mucus lining in your intestinal tract, and your cortisol goes up, and you start to develop this leaky gut. So you get this puffiness, this bloating, maybe you get a muffin top, or your muffin top turns into a cake top, and you've done nothing different with your diet or your exercise. And in fact, most people are exercising harder. They start cutting back calories. They're trying to take control of the situation. So I love to do the GI map because it gives me a real window into what's happening. It looks at, rules out for pathogens and parasites. So a lot of people have H. pylori. Now, H. pylori is fairly ubiquitous in the American population, and it won't necessarily cause symptoms or problems. A lot of people can live with it and be asymptomatic. But if you pair that with declining estrogen and progesterone, all of a sudden you can start getting reflux and heartburn all the time. So and it causes a chain of dysbiosis. It's like a domino effect where some of your good bacteria actually start to get really, really high to overcompensate for, having dysbiosis, but then it can also cause really low levels of beneficial bacteria too. So you kind of look at the numbers relative to H. pylori. So I do look for pathogens, treatments, pathogens and parasites, and treat for it. I've picked up everything from like Giardia to E. coli to, traveler's diarrhea, just while treating someone for perimenopause. I just happen to pick those things up. Can also tell me if your yeast levels are high. But what I love about the test too is it looks at an enzyme called beta-glucuronidase, which tells me, it paints a picture of your overall inflammation, but it can also tell me if you're recycling estrogen in your gut.
That's interesting.
Which is fascinating, right?
Yeah.
So if someone is going to go on or is a candidate for hormone replacement therapy, right? Because during menopause, your estrogen levels are surging. You may get surges throughout, but once your levels decline, they really decline. So even if your levels are low, if you go on hormone replacement and you continue to recycle it in your gut, that's going to be very unhealthy for your body, and you will feel unwell also. So you want to make sure that your pathways are good and you're eliminating and you're pooping and you're getting enough fiber every day to move the estrogen through, whether your beta glucuronidase is high or not. But I also love the GI map because it tests for a leaky gut. It tests for it really looks at your digestive fire and will tell me a lot about if you're making enough hydrochloric acid, which those levels tend to decline when cortisol levels are high, or, after the age of 30, 40, you really see levels decline. And it's funny, just sidebar, recently I just didn't have time for a week to reorder my supplements. I let them lapse, and I didn't take my hydrochloric acid for a week. And it was the first time in my life I was like, wow, I really noticed a difference without it. Like I had a couple reflux events and was constipated. And I was like, this has never happened to me before in my life. I've never been constipated. So it was fascinating. I was like, okay, this is me in perimenopause, like hardcore.
And yeah, I think talk about the leaky gut thing, because we haven't talked about that on the podcast. I think it's kind of an arbitrary phrase. So what exactly is leaky gut? And will you again just really punch on the reduced mucosal lining that women experience during perimenopause and menopause, and how that might lead to the leaky gut?
Yes.
What's that connection?
So we have what's called the microbiome, which is really the universe, the bacterial universe that populates our gut. It's in a healthy person, it weighs about 3 to 4 pounds. You have 3 to 4 pounds of bacteria in your small intestine. Wow. I mean, how freaking cool is that? And that, it turns on everything from genes that express illness to genes that express longevity to, the gut is really the control center of our gut. It is so important for everyday functions like elimination, detoxification, but also the production of beneficial bacteria that correlate with brain health. We know that deficiencies of certain good bacteria can lead to anxiety, can lead to depression, can lead to ADD or ADHD. So we are learning so much about gut health right now. So then in menopause, and just as women, we have the estrobolome, which is kind of the estrogen mediated bacteria in our gut. And so as our estrogen levels decline, we can naturally lose levels of good, healthy bacteria. So it's really important that you support gut health. And what happens is when that bacterial balance changes and the composition of the inside of your intestinal wall changes, the intestinal wall can become inflamed or thin out and become semi-permeable. So I don't know if you remember your 8th grade biology classes where you learned about semi-permeable membranes and things going back and forth across the cell wall, right? So that happens in our intestinal tract when the lining thins out. Undigested food particles, these are at a microscopic levels. You're not passing a head of broccoli back and forth across your intestinal wall, but at a microscopic level, you don't want food actually, and food molecules passing back and forth across the intestinal wall. So you become very inflamed, you become bloated, you can get brain fog, you can feel sluggish, fatigue. And normally the intestinal wall has these tight gap junctions that they're like puzzle pieces that snap together. And when the gut is leaky, they separate, they become very loosey-goosey. So my goal is in treating people, is I weed and reseed, right? I get rid of the pathogens that don't belong there, and then replenish the good bacteria. Not everyone has pathogens or bugs or worms or parasites. Some people just have really low levels of good bacteria, and they have really low levels of hydrochloric acid. When your levels of hydrochloric acid are low, that is the perfect breeding ground for parasites, for bacteria that don't belong there. Because your stomach, and for yeast also, and SIBO, because your stomach is supposed to be a cauldron of fire, right? And so without enough digestive fire, things go awry, right? You get bacterial overgrowth, but you also can get reflux because you need hydrochloric acid and you need zinc to keep that pyloric sphincter closed. So once it starts flapping open and people start taking Prilosec and all these H2 blockers, you're worsening the situation of bacterial overgrowth. You can worsen SIBO symptoms, you can worsen yeast overgrowth, all sorts of things go awry. So I try to, in time, rebuild digestive fire and put healing nutrients in there like aloe and slippery elm and marshmallow root and glutamine, and really get people rebalanced. And then they start eliminating every day. They start pooping every day. They start, the brain fog clears up, the mood improves, sleep is better, the bloating goes down. So it's totally possible to get resolution in these symptoms. And I have people come to me with chronic diarrhea and bloating and severe irritable bowel. And then I have the other end of the spectrum of people who are severely constipated and don't poop more than once or twice a week. So we get everyone, really, really balanced. And I even see people with like torturous colons who are told, oh, well, you're going to be really constipated and you have to take Miralax and you've got to take laxatives. And it's not true. You can actually, the structural issue shouldn't be too much of a barrier. If your nutrients are on par, you have digestive fire, and, there are motility agents you can take. Ginger is a great motility agent. So there's a lot you can do to facilitate just regular bowel movements.
So backing up a little bit, the GI map is a test that you've mentioned a couple of times. So will you tell people a little bit more about what they could experience or expect if they decide to take the GI map test? And then if they really need to do that in conjunction with a practitioner so that they can best interpret the data.
Well, so you should the only way you can get the test is through a practitioner. It's not direct to consumer. So, but what you can expect is that you are going to get a test kit with a French fry tray that you need to poop in, and you scoop out samples. There's a tiny little shovel in the cap and of a little twist jar, and you scoop out different samples. And play with your poop a little and say, that looks interesting. And you shake it all up, you send it to the lab. And then your practitioner, will circle back with you with the results. The test is complicated. I've looked at a couple hundred, but I do not consider myself an expert on it. It takes years to really understand the test. So I work with a doctor at the lab to help me interpret it, just being transparent. And again, we go through just the patterns of dysbiosis. We look at, and I teach this to my own clients too. I explain to them the patterns of this dysbiosis, if they're missing any nutrients, if they're recycling estrogen in the gut. And then we go through their diet, right? What is the best diet to heal a leaky gut? Are you showing back methane producing bacteria that could be connected to SIBO? Is a FODMAP diet more appropriate for you? I have a couple of people I've seen in my practice who have extraordinarily limited diets. They don't tolerate anything without severe stomach pain. They can't look at a vegetable, and maybe they tolerate some fruit and a little protein. Like I'm thinking of my client, Rachel, who ate like chicken breast and like canned peaches. And that was like kind of her diet for years. Wow. And now she eats vegetables. She lost all this weight. She also had like an unspecified autoimmune condition that was not diagnosed, but she was on heavy, heavy medications like Plaquenil. And, we got her eating all these foods and she was able to really decrease her meds. So, what you can expect is really starting off with a prescriptive diet of what are the best foods for you. Eventually, you should be able to progress. Like nobody should be on a limited diet forever, but maybe you want to start off with cooked vegetables. And then as you build up your digestion, move to raw. You want to also think about, by the way, like chewing your food. Most people don't realize digestion starts in the mouth, not in the stomach. And that you have to be in a parasympathetic state when you start eating, which means you're not, sympathetic is fight or flight. So parasympathetic is when you're in that nice, relaxed place, like, you take some deep breaths. I mean, there's something to be said for saying grace before a meal, or just meditating or showing gratitude for the meal you're about to have, and just being in a great mindset. A lot of us are eating in a fight or flight state. We're eating at our desks. We're eating in front of the computer and the phone. And please, I'm guilty as charged too. We all do it. Or dashboard dining, right? I like the moms who are
funny.
right, shuttling their kids to a million sporting events. So we do it, but it's really important to slow down, chew your food, put your fork down between bites, just try and make meals joyful and relaxed. And I would say if you're like super stressed, try and delay eating, because you're not going to digest it well. You're just going to be super bloated all the time. And the same goes for toilet training. I do a lot of toilet training with my people, which means you get, if you need a squatty potty, that can really help you structure. And I'm sure you know this is a PT, right? It helps you structurally align and be in a more of a, simulates like a squat position, which is how people used to poop before there were toilets. And can travel to many European countries and see there's still Turkish toilets where you put your feet on either side of a hole and crouch down. So, that is a wonderful position to be in to enable your bowel movements to pass out easily. So you want to also try and poop the same time every day. Like I think guys are really good at this. They'll sit in the toilet for like half an hour reading or on their phones. Like they're comfortable with the idea. Women are like, I gotta go.
It's so true.
Right?
Yes, that is so true.
So fortunately, again, you can do it. It can take about a year, but you can do it. And there are good peptides that you can also do if nothing else seems to work that kind of facilitate bowel movements. But you want to try and sit on the toilet every single day and condition your body like, this is the time when I need to have a bowel movement.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's such a gut brain connection. I mean, the two are intertwined. And then, yes, I do use supplements to treat and kill off any gut bugs that don't belong there. And then treatments, to heal and reseal up that leaky gut. So treatment takes on average 3 to 6 months. It's a slow process, sometimes more. I often retest if I've done H. pylori treatment or treatment for pathogens. I will then retest. I'll do 2 months of treatment, a month off, and then a retest. And sometimes I need to treat again because some gut bugs are biofilm producers, and biofilms are kind of these balloons. Imagine them as little balloons outside, a bacteria, and you have to pop the balloon. Those balloons keep them real safe and protected inside your gut wall. So sometimes after treatment, more will come out that have kind of been hiding under the cell walls, under the intestinal wall. So some come out. So sometimes people are like, I did all this treatment and it's still not gone. Sometimes it's worse. And then, so we'll have to do a couple rounds of treatment. So in other people, it kills off and succeeds the first time. So I like to manage people and say, let's just see how your body does. And then, Lord forbid, if it's still not going away, then we really need to do some digging and check for Lyme and mold and other, real environmental disruptors for the gut too.
I think that you're a great resource to have. Like I have a couple members who have irritable bowel syndrome, and if you're not really trained in this subject, you go and you don't have these tools at your disposal. And I think that it's important, like we could dig in, well, how do you treat this? How do you treat this? And it's kind of a moot point unless you know that you have that. So if you could give general advice for what foods are great for gut bacteria, and then what foods are harmful for the beneficial gut bacteria or can lead to that inflammation, kind of general principles here, because we know that each person is individual, right? Bioindividuality is key, Cynthia Thurlow says. So start with that general advice on gut health. What can people do to start? Everyone likes to, try to fix it on their own. So what would you recommend for people to try to fix it on their own before maybe they come to you for more specialized testing and treatment?
Yeah, I always like to add foods in that naturally displace other foods. So certainly, probiotic foods are great. Kimchi, sauerkraut, kefir, kombucha, those are all foods with a nice amount of probiotics. fiber is really important, like flax and chia seeds. Think of fiber as just a nice intestinal broom, right? That just sweeps out, sloughs off any dead cells, which, by the way, like a third of your poop is just dead bacteria. I mean, how cool is that,
Ew.
right?
Ew. I don't know if I'd be a good poop practitioner.
Oh, I'm like, let me just roll up my sleeves and get on in there. So fiber is really great, and fiber binds excess estrogen. So if you're excess estrogen dominant, it's a great way to bind for men and women. Men can be estrogen dominant too. And then you want to make sure you're getting plenty of protein, good quality protein, grass-fed meats, poultry, eggs, wild Alaskan salmon, wild caught fish, seafood, which is an anti-inflammatory. You want to get a lot of root vegetables like sweet potatoes and parsnips and turnips and butternut and acorn squash and spaghetti squash. You want to make sure you're getting in bitter greens, because the bitter, so Americans have like a sweet and salty palate. We don't realize bitter, which is in the front of our tongue, or is that salt? I can't remember if salt is in the front, bitter is in the back, or vice versa. But yeah, bitter is really important because the bitter taste stimulates the release of bile from the gallbladder and gets the digestive juices flowing, and also facilitates bowel movement. So one of my treatments for constipation is to take Swedish bitters and put them on the tongue, 15 minutes before a meal, to tell your body, okay, incoming food, let's start turning on our engines and revving up the motor and moving things along. So bitters are really great. So things like kale and collard greens and Swiss chard and broccoli and cauliflower and Brussels sprouts and artichokes, those are all amazing. And the cauliflower, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, and artichokes are all in the brassica family, which again also helps facilitate the proper metabolism of estrogen.
That's interesting too. We're going to talk more about estrogen for sure when we talk about the Dutch test. So it's fun to hear this stuff because I eat all those foods a lot, and I don't have any gut issues. So you didn't mention yogurt. Is that high enough in the probiotics as like the kimchi and the sauerkraut and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, you can get some really good quality yogurt with probiotics. I love Siggi's because it's low sugar and it's higher protein. So yes, yogurt, as if you tolerate dairy, you're absolutely correct. And then what should you avoid? You should avoid pro-inflammatory food. Oh, and I didn't mention berries. Of course, berries are a wonderful anti-inflammatory, berries and cherries. So what you want to avoid are high sugar, pro-inflammatory foods. So just the processed white sugar, the breads, often gluten. Gluten is an issue for a lot of people. Now, it's a sensitivity for a lot of people, which is how it slips under the radar. It's not an anaphylactic reaction, but a lot of people, I believe it's because of how crops are treated in this country, are sprayed with glyphosate, which is a very nasty pesticide. It's in Roundup, which is a weed killer. So we're putting that on our food. Now, how do I know this? Because I know not only personally, but from 27 plus years in practice, I have so many of my clients who go to Europe, who eat the bread, who eat the pasta, have absolutely no issues, no weight gain, no bloat, no digestive problems. They come back here, the bloat is back, they can't tolerate it at all. So it's really how it's processed, it's genetically modified, all of those things. Even organic can be problematic for some people. So if you're having a lot of gut issues, I'm like, give your body a break from gluten for, 1, 3, 6 months, see how you do until you're healed, and then try reintroducing it. The goal is not to have you never have these foods again. The goal is to heal up your gut so you're not so inflamed.
Will you say that Roundup chemical, was it glyphosate?
Yeah, it's glyphosate.
I just had a really cool guest on, Carrie B, and she talked about the top 3 toxins that she really focuses on, and that was one of them. But she didn't kind of relate how grain products or gluten products outside of America may be developed and processed differently, and that people could tolerate them in other parts of the world, and they come back and they may eat American gluten and then be exposed to those chemicals and then have that gluten intolerance. That's really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, Europe is amazing at they have a zero tolerance policy for pesticides on their food that are really toxic. It's amazing. So, so yes. So, and you want to, be very careful with booze. I mean, that's like, talk about just poking holes in your intestinal tract.
Talk about that. Will you really, that's a really important thing. I hear that a lot with women who,
yeah.
They have that habit of like a drink a night, and then they stop, and then they start sleeping better. Like, what is the link there between booze and gut health?
Well, and also people don't realize like wine is one of the most pesticide heavy foods that you're consuming. Grapes are like super high with pesticides. So you can get organic wine, you can get dry farm wine, but or Scout and Cellar's another good brand. But the problem is that booze, it causes a lot of inflammation in the gut. It doesn't matter if it's hard alcohol or if it's wine or a White Claw or whatever, spiked seltzer, all of it causes a lot of inflammation and thins out the gut wall. And especially if you're drinking on empty stomach, like that is very, very hard on the body. And what happens is, your liver wants to start detoxing it. You may have a drink at 9 o'clock at night, but your detox pathways are kicking in around 2 or 3 when you're kind of in the deep healing phases of your sleep. And then your cortisol goes up and during the detox process, and you wake up, you don't get such a sound sleep or REM sleep during the process. So alcohol is really problematic. And as women go through menopause, also, I find most do not tolerate caffeine well at all, and yet are having terrific insomnia due to the drop in estrogen and progesterone. So I take people off caffeine and they start sleeping. The brain fog is alleviated. Their energy is much better, but you do have to be careful for sure. And I can tell you, I have zero tolerance for caffeine, and I rarely drink alcohol because it just destroys my sleep. I'm like, no, I'd rather sleep. I really would.
I think that's an important thing.
Yeah.
I always think about, the freshman 15 in college and how it's just the perfect storm. Like college, you're drinking more, you're not sleeping, you're stressed out, you're eating processed foods. I mean, it's like no wonder people gain weight. Or, motherhood. I think a lot of people come to me and they're like, I just could never lose the weight after I had a baby. And it's the perfect storm for weight gain. Your hormones are all over the place, you're not sleeping. Carrie B kind of talked about how a lot of breastfeeding moms will just be like on their phone in the middle of the night being exposed to that blue light, which impairs sleep. And then maybe they're coping with some alcohol every now and then, and then eating kids' food. You can really put all of these pieces together and really start to understand, wow, like there are so many areas that I could optimize with my lifestyle. I think that's what's cool. That's what's really cool about what we do. It's not like a cookie cutter approach. There's a lot of different things that can be optimized. I have a little bit of a selfish question. I have a really close friend who, and he's male, and he's been struggling with IBS for at least a year. So off and on his whole life, but it's gotten really bad over the last year. And he was doing like an elimination diet and found a lot of nutrients that he didn't tolerate well. I don't know what his care has been. I have not asked. What would you suggest for someone who really is struggling with irritable bowel syndrome on where do they start with? Do they start with testing? Do they start with an elimination diet? What is your general recommendation for someone who's really struggling with IBS?
But it depends how fast you want the process to go. If you have time to spare, absolutely start with an elimination diet where you get rid of dairy, gluten, soy, corn, eggs, peanuts, and shrimp. Start there. That's like the classic elimination diet that eliminates the top, 8 allergic foods. However, for every person who I see in my practice, I test, I don't guess. I'm a dietitian, not a magician. So I just test out of the gate. No one comes to see me without their blood, stool, and urine and hormones tested. Mm-hmm. And so, because you have to figure out, is it a deficiency in digestive enzymes? Do I have a parasite? Like I would ask him, well, has he been traveling? To me, IBS, by the way, is a really big umbrella diagnosis for very specified.
Yes.
It's kind of the diagnosis of, I don't know what's going on, but I know your gut's inflamed. Not helpful.
Yeah.
What direction of treatment is there other than like Miralax for some people? No, thank you. It's, I always say like constipation is not a Miralax deficiency. So you want to make sure that you're looking at, do I have pathogens? Do I just have dysbiosis? Do I have low levels of good bacteria? And what is my digestive fire like? Am I passing undigested food? Am I actually absorbing my nutrients? What's the problem? Because a gut that's not inflamed should be able to tolerate a lot of different foods fine. So, and this is just a sidebar, like a lot of people spend money on expensive food allergy testing. The only thing it tells me is if you've got a leaky gut or a lot of inflammation going on, because they'll say, oh my gosh, I have 30 allergies. Of course you do, because when you're eating anything and you have an inflamed gut, it's not going to be broken down properly. And if you're just constantly exposing that substance again and again to the gut wall, it's going to become sensitized to it.
So you really recommend like the GI map test before a food allergy or insensitivity test?
Yes, because the other thing is, and Chris Kresser wrote a great blog on this, he sent 2 stool samples to 2 different food allergy or blood samples, however it was done, to 2 different food allergy testing companies, and the results were completely different. And it was on the same day from the same samples.
I wonder that too, like if your stool samples would vary day to day, if you'd get different, and that's why you retest sometimes, I guess, to see if it's working.
That's right. And obviously people, hello, if you're passing blood in your stool, like go get a colonoscopy. Don't think a GI map can pick up, microscopic blood in the stool. And I'll say to people, go get a colonoscopy. You've got something cooking, or maybe you have polyps or whatever, but use common sense. This is not the end all be all. You've got to make sure you don't have anything medically going on too. But once you say, okay, I've ruled everything else out, like, yes, get the testing done for sure.
I feel like I have a better understanding of gut health just from this short conversation.
Oh,
Do you have any favorite resources? Like if someone really wants to learn more about gut health, or if I wanted to learn more about gut health, where did you learn how to use the GI map? Any favorite books that you found helpful?
I really liked Dr. Ruscio's book, and I've listened to some of his podcasts, which are very good. He does ascribe to the elemental diet, which I rarely use in practice. I do use it on some people with severe digestive issues, but his book was very helpful. And again, this is why I'm writing my next book on menopause, because I'm going to write all about the gut health piece. And what I know is not in books, in that many books. I've really been self-studied and taught by so many amazing mentors. So it's a complicated field for sure, but I found podcasts are better than books even.
Yeah. Good one. Hopefully I like this one.
Yeah.
I think that one reason that is because a lot of books have been written by men, to be honest. A lot of research has been done by men, and men don't go through menopause and they don't go through perimenopause. And I think that we're finally seeing this wave of really educated women coming into the field and saying, hey, there's a big gap here of evidence-based information on how to properly nourish our bodies throughout this phase. And like, how does it really change? The estrobiome is really fascinating. So I think that we could keep talking about this for a long time. I'm probably going to try to get my friend to come your way because he's suffering, and it's really important to recognize it's not just about the person. It's about how is that person impacted in all of their roles? Like, how is he impacted in his job at work? How is his travel ability impacted? Because my other friend was saying people with IBS were less receptive to the COVID vaccination. So for whatever reason, he's more fearful of COVID and is socially isolating more. How is that impacting his relationships? So I think it's really important to recognize that gut health can impact so many different roles and responsibilities in our life. And it can really, you can see the reduced quality of life for sure that these things can cause people. So I think it's great that you're as a wonderful resource to really send people to if it's, hey, this is a gut issue. I'm going to send you to Esther and we'll get to the bottom of this. So
thank
thank
you.
you for
Well,
your work.
and also just people out there listening, like it's never just in your head. You're not manufacturing these symptoms. So if, again, it's listen to your body. Your body's talking to you. You are the most intelligent and informed person about your own body. So there are answers out there for you, for sure.
Yep. And I think that I'd like to maybe touch on this next before we go into the Dutch test, but we talked about like what gets in the way of people making these food changes, because a lot of times I hear people say, I don't want to be restricted. They kind of just want to do whatever they want and still feel and look the way they want to look. And it's like, well, you can't do that, especially as you get into perimenopause and menopause. You have to make some lifestyle changes if you want to feel and look the way you want. So what do you think are the biggest barriers to people really taking the action that they need to take to see the results that they want to see?
So nature abhors a vacuum. So you can't, the laws of the universe dictate that you can't get what you want without giving up something else. It's just how it works, baby. It's just how it is at this point in life. So you really have to understand your why. Okay. No, I don't want to. Please, I would be a smoking alcoholic if I could. I mean, I absolutely love martinis. I love catching a good buzz. I absolutely am always in a cocktail state of mind. However, I enjoy my sleep and I have a very busy practice where I need to be mentally focused and energized all day long during the day. And at night, I have to take care of my family and be on for them. So really not having energy to get through the day and work out before work and do all the things I want to do is not an option. I'm real clear on my why. So I try to get people to do the same and say, okay, we want to lose weight. Well, why do you want to lose weight? How is your life going to be different? Okay, where do you want to be in 6 months? And we really try and paint a very clear picture of the end goal. And they say, oh, well, I spoke to a young woman yesterday who was having all sorts of GI complaints and was like, my husband and I are going to take a trip to Ireland in a year. And I don't want to be worried about getting on a plane overseas on a flight with an upset stomach and stomach pain, and B, being in the middle of nowhere with no access to a bathroom, not knowing where the ER is or how to reach a doctor. Like, I want to have mental peace of mind. Great. So it's really understanding the why. And also that's another reason why I do the testing, because you can't argue with the numbers. People say, but I really so I have another client, Sarah, who's pre-diabetic and drinks a ton of sweet tea every day. I'm like, Sarah, honey, and she's very overweight. She's like, but I want to lose all this weight, but I don't want to give up my tea. I'm like, well, honey, if you want to lose weight, you've got to give up the tea. I'm not saying never, saying, let's do this for a while. Can you give me a week on this? Can you give me 2 weeks? Can you give me a month? And then people develop proof of concept and they say, okay, this is how motivation works, by the way, is you take the action first and the motivation appears later. So people will say, I don't want to give up alcohol. I can't give up my coffee. No problem. So we're going to give this a month and we're going to see how it goes. I'm going to give you a 30-day challenge. And after 30 days, they're like, wow, my sleep improved. And I went out Saturday night on day 31. I had that glass of wine and man, I felt so hungover and awful. Yep. I don't want to do that anymore. Yep. So they really develop the tools to see what happens to detach from their food attachments, because it's really a psychological attachment. Your body doesn't care, if you're having, wine or not. Happiness is not only at the bottom of a wine bottle. There's other ways to be happy. So if you, can just detach from, what you're addicted to or what your body think you need, what you think your body needs in pursuit of the bigger result of losing weight, of not being bloated, of fitting in your skinny jeans, of actually feeling confident walking around naked in front of yourself and your partner. of being intimate with the lights on, of not shying away of social situations, not shying away of having your picture taken, being able to shop and get what you want. I mean, these are all concerns that I hear all day long, every day. I'm no different than you. I want those same results too. So I know that when you put in the work, and when I put in the work too, you just feel better about yourself, and then you feel more confident, and that confidence reinforces the motivation of your why.
I think that's a beautiful way to say it, that the motivation doesn't come first. The action comes first and the motivation follows it. And you're so spot on when you say people, they don't want to give something up. I'm like, you don't have to give it up, but can we significantly reduce it to like once a week, or like you said, a 30-day challenge, and see how you feel. And I focus a lot on sugar because I focus a lot on insulin resistance, and added sugar turnkeys, way to get diabetes and insulin resistance. And so, they say, oh my gosh, I had this and I felt so terrible after they kind of clean up their diet a bit, and then they have it. And then they're like, I don't even like that anymore, or I didn't even want that anymore. So I think it's really cool to see, yeah, like you just have to commit to it. Or I love how you said it's psychological, like your body doesn't know. I love half and half in my coffee. I love it so much. But when I'm trying to do a clean fast, I have given it up, and it's okay. It's like, you know what? This is just like almost like one thing that I'm holding on to is my half and half in my coffee. And it's like, as you said, my body doesn't care. It's all
Yeah.
psychological. So I think that was a really good point. And keeping your eye on your why is like the first thing that I start with everyone, because restriction is going to come either way. I say you either need to restrict yourself from instant gratification now, or you can have the restriction of what clothes you wear and how mobile you are and how independent you are in 30 years. You get to pick when you are restricted. Like, is it going to be a self-imposed restriction now, or obligatory restriction later? And I think I just have such a clear picture of that as a geriatric PT, like really it's really sad. It's like last night I was speaking with my husband right before bed. I'm like, I don't want to talk about it, but today was a really sad day. Like just having to evaluate two people with like end stage Alzheimer's disease is really, really terrible. It's really terrible and sad. And so it's like, there's no better motivator than seeing that and then wanting to take action now, no matter how hard it is. And so I think that's something else to really point out to people, that Esther said 3 to 6 months minimum to really see these changes. And I think that is a huge problem with weight loss and diet culture, is the marketing of instant results and instant gratification. And it's like, this is a lifelong journey. You don't just get to go on a diet and then go off the diet. You have to change your lifestyle if you want these lifelong results. So
and it doesn't have to be perfect to get results either. I mean, I still do have clients that drink alcohol and still lose weight, but they're really watching every other piece in their life, and they're on very low carbs and they're working out a lot. So you have to figure out, okay, the other way to look at it is this, because if the first part of the conversation felt very restrictive to you and uncomfortable, where you're like, I just can't do that, I'm shutting down out of the gate. Yep. Okay, then think of it this way. You give yourself 3 non-negotiables, right? What are the 3 things I'm not going to give up? Half and half in your coffee, or just, a glass of wine once a week, or chocolate, whatever it is.
Chocolate chip cookies for me.
Chocolate chip cookies.
Not giving them up.
Not giving them up.
At least not right now.
No, and I will not give up chocolate or martinis, but I have about 2 martinis a year. And just knowing I can have it if I want to is half the battle. And same with the chocolate. And then the portion sizes, right? If I have chocolate, it's like 1 piece, 1 square. And again, I don't have it every night because I don't really need it or feel better on it. It's just, it tastes good. Yep. But you really have to think about your non-negotiables, but then everything else, you're tight with, or you build in indulgences and say, fine, I know I have dinner out Saturday night, it's date night, I'm going to have a glass of wine or a dessert, but not both.
Mm-hmm. And I think we have to become a little bit more restrictive going through perimenopause and menopause. And I know that that's not what people want to hear, but I do think the more I talk with people like yourself, the more I realize it's kind of true. I'm 31 right now. I can get away with quite a bit because I'm young, I'm active, and I have estrogen. But as I age, I think maybe that's why I wanted to keep my half and half. But as I age, it's like, I know that I'm going to have to tighten a few things up. And I think it's really important that, we are sustainable as we go, so really keeping that long-term picture in mind and not going on like this crash diet. But as we've talked about, like pick a few things and try to optimize it. But I think knowledge is power, and just knowing how alcohol affects the gut, knowing how processed food affects the gut, knowing those things should motivate you to want to take action. I don't know. I think that we had intended to talk about the Dutch test today, and hormones. And I'm going to ask you if you'd be willing to come back for a part 2 so that we could dive into that.
I would love that. That would be amazing. Yeah, let's do it.
I had a feeling that you'd say that. That's why I didn't kind of cut this out. I'm like, I think that she'll just do it live, little improv. So I think that'll be great if we can schedule another podcast interview. We'll call this one part 2 for really gut health, and optimizing that microbiome. And then we'll come back and do another interview that talks about the Dutch test. I've been wanting to talk about this on the podcast. I think you're really skilled, just from this conversation, skilled clinician, who can really break the information down for our listeners. And for those who don't know, can you give them a little preview about what the Dutch test is that we'll be talking about in part 2?
The Dutch test is going to tell you your production and detox pathways of hormones, and it looks at their metabolites, and it tells me, how you're processing. Well, as I said, your production and your pathways. It also looks at the neurotransmitters in your brain. I do the Dutch Complete. So that is fascinating in and of itself, because as I mentioned, like as your gut changes, right, your small intestine is where you manufacture about 90% of your serotonin and dopamine. So if we fix your gut and the inflammation in your gut, we're going to fix your brain. But the nice thing is the Dutch and the GI map speak to each other. So, having those two tests in conjunction with each other is great. A and B, sorry, I'm getting a little off track. Circling back to the neurotransmitter piece, that also is going to tell me whether you're a candidate for nutrients that are precursors to serotonin and dopamine. Perhaps you may not need that antidepressant because it's not really working anyway. I see plenty of people on antidepressants who still have very low serotonin and dopamine. So it can tell me, do you need to be complex? Yeah, it's fascinating. So do you need to be complex? Are you deficient in nutrients? Do you need to eat more cruciferous vegetables? Do you need to eat more fiber in your diet? So again, it's a real North Star. And then if it will also tell me if you're a candidate for hormone replacement therapy, where we start, what dosages. It tells me a lot about your adrenal function too, and your cortisol, your morning and your metabolized cortisol. So it's a great overall window.
Yeah, I'm excited. Happening. I've looked into it a little bit. Again, just like the GI map, I've never used it in practice. I don't know how to use it. So I'm looking forward to learning a lot from you in our next interview, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks, Esther.
Thank you.